As Israel's assault on Gaza enters its fifth month, the death toll in the enclave continues to rise, and the humanitarian crisis deepens. So when will the killing stop? And what is the Netanyahu government's long-term strategy? In this week's UpFront special, I'll ask the former director of Mossad, Efraim Halevy. Efraim Halevy, thank you so much for joining us on UpFront.
I'm happy to be with you this evening.
Since the start of Israel's assault on Gaza, Israel's stated aim has been to destroy Hamas. Yet, despite being 4 months into this war, we're entering the fifth month, and dropping enough explosives that rival the weight of 2 nuclear bombs, Israel has allegedly killed just 20 to 30% of Hamas members. And instead, they've killed tens of thousands of civilians. You're the former director of Mossad, which is Israel's national intelligence agency, equivalent to the CIA here in the United States. Do you agree with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government strategy?
I think that this event, which took place now, is unique in the history of the state of Israel. And I think that the strategy of the Prime Minister in launching this counterattack to the invasion of Israel in the south gave him the right, together with his cabinet and the enlarged cabinet and other cabinets which succeeded them, to conduct this war. And I think that we are doing the best we can to achieve the aims that he has named as the aims he would like to achieve.
But I'm talking a little bit more about strategy. Do you think the strategy that he's deploying is proper?
I cannot think of any other strategy. After we were invaded on a Saturday morning a few months ago, and after suffering the deaths of well over 1,000 people, I cannot imagine any other strategy except to counterattack and to try and to get maximum destruction of our enemy.
The problem I think that many people have is that it's not just the enemy that's being destroyed, and that the counterattack ostensibly against Hamas has had far more of a devastating impact on the civilians. Again, only 20 to 30% of Hamas members have been killed, and yet tens of thousands of civilians have been killed. 1% of the overall child population in Gaza has been killed since October 7th. Mothers, children, they make up 2/3 of the population killed. Is this entirely unavoidable?
If you're talking about proportionality, I think we have to start at the beginning. If you remember that there was an invasion of Israel on one morning, in which within a few hours we lost a 4-figure number of civilians, not necessarily military people. Yes, 1 or 2 of the places that were attacked were military installations, but basically it was attack against civilians who were enjoying a holiday, civilians who were in one place having a big musical festival for the youth of the country. And I think that the retaliation has been the retaliation which could not be avoided.
So the law of proportionality, though, doesn't mean that if someone commits a war crime by killing women and children, innocent civilians, etc., that then the person who was hit can then retaliate by hitting the other person's women and children. That's not what proportionality involves. If we begin from the premise that what Hamas did on October 7th was a war crime, which we do, I'm stipulating that at the beginning of this conversation, how do we then, again, justify tens of thousands of innocent people being killed? I mean, this, again, seems avoidable, so why do it?
The people who are being killed are not necessarily civilians. In order to get at the Hamas forces, it was necessary to attack installations and underground systems where there was a mixture of both people who were part of the forces of the Hamas, the military forces of Hamas, and part of them civilians. It was not possible in this situation to separate the one from the other. And whether there has been a crime of one kind or another that you are trying to describe will probably be one day discussed in the proper courts of justice.
Let me ask you a question, because this has been something that I've heard stated by many representatives of the Israeli government before, that the killing of the women, the killing of the children, the killing of the innocent civilians has been an unfortunate but unavoidable collateral damage to strike Hamas, and that it had to be done in order to control Hamas. That's the position you're essentially taking, correct?
Correct.
If those had been Israeli children in those hospitals and schools and churches and mosques, would you have done the same thing?
I think that, unfortunately, in the first hours of the war, which was launched against Israel, in which the target were not military installations and not military camps, but civilian towns and villages, I think that the fact of the matter is that we had no option but to counterattack.
Right, but sir, respectfully, sir, you haven't answered my question. If those had been Israeli children in those same hospitals that allegedly had Hamas installations in schools and in camps, if Israeli children and Israeli civilians had been in those very same places instead of Palestinian civilians, would you have done the same thing?
I think that's a hypothetical question which I cannot answer. And I think
but if it's unavoidable, why can't you answer it if it's unavoidable? If you're saying that this had to be done, that we regret killing Palestinian civilians, but it had to be done to control Hamas, it's the only option we had, why would the options open up if suddenly there were Israeli children there? Wouldn't it be the exact same thing? Unless you're saying that Israeli children are worth more.
I agree with you that probably as a result of the nature of the war which broke out, there were civilians who died, including people who were non-combatants. I myself have been the participant in one way or another, either as a child when I was in World War II, and after that in the War of Independence of Israel, and successive wars that Israel had to fight for its existence and independence. And unfortunately, in times of war, it's very difficult to try and to separate the civilian population from the armed population.
Fair enough. But if I'm understanding your response correctly, though, you're saying it's harder to do that when they're Palestinian children, because, again, you conceded that it was unavoidable when it's Palestinians. When it's not Palestinians, oh, maybe we could rethink the strategy. But let me move on, because as we've said, Israel has killed over 27,000 Palestinians in Gaza, over 10,000 of whom are infants and children, and they've wounded 66,000 people. The UN's humanitarian office accused Israeli authorities of systematically denying it access to northern Gaza to deliver aid, and it effectively hindered their operations, they say. The head of the World Food Program stated, people in Gaza risk dying of hunger just miles from trucks filled with food. We're seeing reports of countless children who have faced amputations without anesthesia. On average, 10 children are losing their legs every day. And now the UN's top court has ordered Israel to prevent death, to prevent destruction, to prevent any acts of genocide in Gaza. With all of that in the backdrop, is it fair to say that Israel is not doing enough to protect civilians?
I think that Israel is doing its best not to attack its civilians. I think that Hamas is intentionally creating situations which make the attack against civilians unavoidable. And I think also, if you mentioned the International Court of Justice, there has been a hearing which took place a couple of weeks ago, and the court did not decide that Israel was committing any act of illegality in what it was doing. And
They said that it was
we were
plausible.
allowed to-
They
we
said
were-
they said that it was they said that it was
excuse me.
plausible. So just I don't want my audience to be confused and think that you're suggesting that the court ruled to the contrary, which wasn't the point of the hearing. This was about the emergency measures, and what the court said was that it was plausible that genocide was happening, and they ordered Israel to prevent any acts. And when they listed all of the things that Israel was to prevent happening, those were effectively the definition, the textbook definition of genocide.
I don't think so. I don't think this is
What, you don't think so about what?
simply-
No, the court, that's not a matter of
I don't-
opinion.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. I don't accept the way you are framing what is happening. I think that what has actually happened is totally different than what you have just now described.
I said that the court said that it was plausible that genocide was happening in Gaza by the Israeli government, and that it was ordered to prevent such matters. And when it listed the specific things that Israel was to prevent doing, those things were the items that define genocide in international law. Which part of what I said was untrue?
Look, if you want to start listing how the two sides have performed what they've been doing, I think you should go according to the sequence of affairs. I think that raping women and cutting up bodies of people, as it was in the first few hours of the war, and preventing them being identified in any way, and after that, taking the people who they could and removing them from where they were and capturing them and taking them across the border and acting as if they had the freedom of to do whatever they wanted, to romp over Israel in every village that they entered and to cause havoc. I think it is, one has to see the both sides of what is happening, and not just the simple description of yours of what happened to the Gaza population. I myself am very upset that the Gaza population has suffered so much. And I also am upset that the leaders of Gaza today are considering to continue their war and not to seek a ceasefire, which would ultimately, in one way or another, enable the hostages on both sides to be returned. I think that what you are trying to do is to place the blame on what has happened on Israel. We did not begin this war. We did not launch this war. We did not spend hours in attacking people and carving up their bodies. We did not rape people. We didn't do all these things. And I think that this has to be mentioned and put in clear form.
Would it be an accurate representation of your position then to say that because Hamas allegedly did the things that you're claiming they did, that Israel's response is warranted even if it also contravenes international law? Is that a fair representation?
No, I don't think that we have acted against international law. We have a legal system, a military legal system, and if acts are being carried out which are against the rules of combat in international law, then this will be probably examined in due course. But I think that this is not the case, and I don't think that this should be necessarily the main issue that we should be discussing this evening. I think what we should try and find out is how to put an end to this war and how to bring about a reconciliation, and moreover, above all, to release those who were captive and have been dragged across the border and are now dying in the dungeons in Gaza.
So obviously, I want to hold everyone accountable for what they do, but I also, to your point, want to talk about, to use your word, reconciliation. I want to talk about peace. I want to talk about ceasefires. You've talked in the past about Israel and Hamas having dialogue, having a kind of, to quote you, a kind of mutual existence. You also said in 2016 on this very show that you have to, quote, talk to your enemies. What would a dialogue now between Israel and Hamas look like?
I, unfortunately, cannot imagine today a dialogue between Israel and Hamas. I, for many years, advocated this. And I know that at one time there were serious attempts by the Hamas leaders as well to try and get a dialogue going, especially sometime around between 2005 and 2010. And I think the Hamas at that time was also interested in finding maybe United States support for an effort to bring about a reconciliation between Israel and the Hamas. But this didn't work out that way. And unfortunately, instead of that, every few years, Hamas launched an attack against Israel. We had suffered casualties. We had one case, we had a soldier who was taken across the border and spent 5 to 6 years in a jail of the Hamas in Gaza. He was later he was repatriated. One soldier against over 1,000 Palestinians who were in Israeli prisons, including Yahya Sinwar, who was in an Israeli prison, and he was repatriated amongst with all the leaders who later became the leaders of subsequent attacks against Israel.
If dialogue isn't possible, if you feel that Hamas is in a place ideologically or politically where they're not looking for peace or reconciliation, then how do you imagine getting the hostages back who you've been talking about? How do you imagine those families, receiving their loved ones once again? What do you do? And has Netanyahu done enough to make it happen?
I think there has been an effort over the past few weeks, more than a few weeks, to get a dialogue going and to find ways and means of repatriating prisoners on both sides of the divide between us and Hamas. And I think that they are not concerned so much as to get back the prisoners that they have lost, and they're not inclined to release the captives and the hostages that they have. And every day that goes by, more and more people may be losing their lives as a result of the foot dragging of Hamas on the negotiations which are now proceeding.
I want to ask you about the Hannibal directive. It's an operational order developed by the Israeli military in the 80s to prevent the capture of soldiers at any cost, including endangering their lives to prevent them from being captured. According to Israeli newspaper Haaretz, for the army, a, quote, dead soldier is better than a captive soldier who forces the state to release thousands of captives in order to obtain his release. You were already in Mossad when the directive was introduced, and you eventually went on to head the agency. Is this a directive that you supported?
I do not know of any such directive. I've never heard of such a directive before. And with all due respect to you, I question the sincerity of this particular item that you have on your desk.
When you say you've never heard of such a directive, you've heard of the Hannibal directive. You're saying that you weren't given that directive. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying I don't know of the existence of such a directive.
Okay. Other people who have been in the military have talked about the directive. They've said that they have seen it employed. They've said that they've seen it canceled. All of these people who are discussing the Hannibal directive, what do you make of it?
You're talking about an item of which I am totally ignorant. I'm terribly sorry. I would be very happy to accommodate you, but I cannot follow this line of your discussion with me because I am not familiar with what you're talking about.
Israeli Air Force Colonel Naf Eretz referred to October 7th as a, quote, mass Hannibal event in reference to the controversial directive ordering Israeli commanders to kill their own soldiers to prevent them from being taken captive. When I hear that, just as one example, among others, can you understand why the public may find it implausible that you, the head of the Mossad, former head of the Mossad, has never even heard of such a directive when multiple members of the IDF, multiple members of government have said that they've had the directive, seen the directive, challenged the directive, imposed the directive. Can you see why that might be implausible to people?
I have never seen any mention of what you've been saying just now. I have not seen it in any item in the press. I have never been involved myself in discussions of this kind. And I don't believe that this item is a verified item. And I don't feel it possible to discuss this with you because I am ignorant as to the entire list of points and discussions that you have just now described.
Okay. I mean, it's entirely possible then that an entire directive was happening in the military and in your organization about which you had no knowledge. I mean, I guess that's possible. It seems, again, implausible, but I'll move on. Another issue I'd like to touch on is the potential of a regional war. In the last few weeks, the U.S. launched airstrikes into Syria and Iraq after an Iranian-backed group claimed an attack on a U.S. outpost in Jordan. Fighting between Hezbollah and Israel has continued along your country's northern border. The U.S. and the U.K. have also been launching strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen in response to Houthi attacks against international shipping. How big is the risk of a larger war in the Middle East right now?
I think there is a danger of a larger war in the Middle East. I don't want to belittle it, but I believe that those who would be potential participants in such a war are not keen to allow such a war to break out. And when I say that, I include also Iran, which in the past and even today is considered one of the most important and the most dangerous enemies of ours. I do not see Iran anxious to enter a war at this stage in the Middle East. And I don't imagine any other of the parties, including, by the way, the Hezbollah forces in the north, who have been attacking various targets in the north of the country, but they have not moved beyond a certain level of war. And I believe also they are not interested in increasing the propensity for a war to break out. So my feeling is, my estimate is that there will not be a major breakout of a regional war in the Middle East in the immediate future.
Before you go, you recently stated that there are many people in Prime Minister Netanyahu's party who have reached a conclusion that it's very dangerous to allow him to stay in power for any long period of time. You said, quote, "Let's imagine we win the war and Mr. Netanyahu will get up and say, 'I won the war.' Maybe it's true he won the war, but what will people say the day after?" And my question to you is exactly that. What will people say about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the aftermath of all of this?
Well, this is a matter of internal politics in Israel. And various people have their views on the future of Israel and the future of the government of Israel. I, for one, are one of the people who believe that the time has come for a change in the leadership in Israel. And I assume that there is a possibility that this will come about. But I don't think that this will influence the war against Hamas between Israel and Hamas at the moment, because that is a matter of national acceptance. And the present war cabinet has in its members not only of the government coalition, but also people outside the coalition. So I believe that on this, I think the chances of a major additional war in the Middle East are not very high.
Mr. Halevy, thank you so much for joining us on UpFront.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that is our show. UpFront, we'll be back next week.